My boss invited me to a concert, and my husband pretended to be on board, but upon my return, he revealed his true feelings with this. Never did I imagine finding myself in a predicament such as this. To be candid, I have always believed that I possessed too much intellect for it. Yet here I find myself, ensconced in solitude within my living room, grappling with the complexities of what transpired. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Claire, a 30-year-old who finds it imperative to unburden my thoughts. It all began last month when my boss, the one who appears to have connections with all the right people, extended an invitation to a concert. This isn't merely a concert, it's an exclusive VIP experience, complete with backstage passes and all the perks that come with it. Clearly, I was filled with enthusiasm. It was the sort of opportunity that existed only in the realm of dreams, and here I was, grasping it, all thanks to my efforts. Surely, I have earned it, haven't I? I toil diligently, and I believe I've rightfully earned a bit of enjoyment, a touch of indulgence, wouldn't you agree? In any case, I shared the news of the invitation with my husband, Ethan, and his reaction was somewhat apathetic. He maintains an air of nonchalance, yet I sensed that something was amiss. His enthusiasm didn't quite match mine. He appeared utterly indifferent to the fact that I was seizing this opportunity. Yet, it hardly crossed my mind. He has always preferred the comforts of home, venturing out only occasionally, and then primarily to the bar with his friends or for some other casual outing. Truly, it is his loss. Yet, this is where the intrigue unfolds. Ethan offered no real support, yet he also refrained from opposing her. He merely shrugged it off and replied, "Sure, go if you wish." He feigned indifference, and that stirred a slight irritation within me. I didn't anticipate a grand celebration, yet a touch more enthusiasm would have been appreciated. He might have at least feigned some happiness for me. Instead, he behaved as though I were preparing for a visit to the dentist. I attended the concert. I spent the entire night away, and I must confess, it was an exhilarating experience. I reveled in the luxury of that exclusive area, savoring complimentary drinks and engaging in conversation with those who truly held significance in this realm. I must admit, I felt quite good. Indeed, while Ethan was at home with the children, my thoughts were elsewhere, far removed from him. I found myself immersed in the lavish attention bestowed upon me by those around me. When I finally arrived home, the clock had struck 2 a.m. I found myself in a slightly inebriated state, perhaps a touch more than advisable. But does it really matter, does it? I had an absolutely wonderful time. As I stepped through the threshold, I found Ethan perched on the couch. I assumed he would have drifted off to sleep by this hour. Yet, there he was, fully alert, simply perched in place, gazing at me with that expression. I find it difficult to articulate, I'm at a loss for words. On the verge of disappointment? He remained silent for a moment. He merely fixed his gaze upon me. There I stood, clad in my concert attire, still basking in the exhilarating glow of the evening's performance. I ought to have experienced a pang of guilt. He had stayed home with the children while I was out enjoying myself at the party. However, I chose not to. At that moment, it hadn't even crossed my mind. My mind was consumed by the sheer brilliance of the night, juxtaposed with Ethan's foolish behavior. Surely, he might have inquired about how it went, don't you think? Yet, rather than asking about the concert or inquiring if I had enjoyed myself, he presented me with an envelope, a letter. I gazed at him, a cloud of confusion settling over me. "What is this?" I inquired, fully aware that the answer would not be favorable. He was not the sort to deliver letters to me, particularly at the hour of 2 in the morning. "You'll see," he said, his voice devoid of inflection, as if he had long since given up on the notion of caring. As I unfolded the letter, anticipation coursed through me. It was brief, merely a handful of sentences, yet it struck me with the force of 1,000 weights. The letter bore the unmistakable handwriting of Ethan, conveying his sentiments of feeling unappreciated in recent times. He sensed that he had become merely a background character in my life, as I grew increasingly distant. The guilt began to seep into my consciousness, yet, truthfully, it failed to take hold. As I perused the pages, a thought crossed my mind: this is utterly foolish. There I stood, still riding the wave of exhilaration from the concert, only to find myself facing my husband, who was enveloped in a theatrical display over a mere letter. I found myself at a loss for words. I hadn't even considered that a response was necessary. What was the reason behind his exaggerated reaction to something so trivial? "I simply don't understand," I remarked. Setting the letter aside, This narrative revolves around my experience attending a concert. Perhaps, he murmured, his gaze averted from mine. Perhaps it revolves around the fact that I no longer hold the top spot in your priorities. You seem to be constantly out and enjoying life, while I find myself here, tethered to the responsibilities of the kids. It feels as though I am invisible. I let out a weary sigh, my eyes drifting upward in exasperation. Oh, really, Ethan? It seems as though you perceive my efforts as non-existent. I engage in my professional duties. I manage the household, and now you're upset because I attended a concert? Just a little something related to work, by the way. He remained silent for a moment. At that moment, he finally met my gaze with unwavering intensity. It seems you've been engaging in this activity quite frequently as of late. Stepping outside, indifferent to the happenings within the confines of home. It goes unnoticed by you. Perhaps I've grown weary of feigning indifference to what truly affects me. The words astonished the young, yet I remained composed. I was not mistaken. I earned that night out. What was the reason for him diverting the focus to something entirely different? Why was he unable to simply allow me to enjoy myself? I merely shook my head in disbelief. Listen, Ethan, I'm not entirely sure what point you're trying to make, but I refuse to sit here and feel guilty for attending a concert. I refuse to express regret for enjoying myself. He rose as if he had reached the end of this dialogue and strode into the adjacent room. The sound of his sigh drifted in from the adjacent room, provoking a sharp pang of frustration within me. Why does he insist on making me feel guilty for something I didn't even do wrong? Yet, I remained indifferent. Not at that moment. My mind was consumed with thoughts of the concert, reflecting on all that I had overlooked. Ethan might choose to be angry, yet this was my existence. The chance that lies before me. I allowed him to brood in the adjacent room. I ceased any attempts to engage him in conversation. What was the purpose? And so, that was the conclusion of the evening. Upon reflection, it seems there were indeed a few indications that I may have erred. However, my perspective was quite different back then. I was immersed in joy, and that was all that truly counted for me. Indeed, that is our current situation. And I am merely at the beginning of my journey. The following day, the situation remained unchanged. Ethan remained aloof, enveloped in his own shadows, and I found myself at a loss, unsure of how to bridge the chasm between us. He averted his gaze, his words no longer directed towards me, as if a barrier had formed between us. It felt as though he was bestowing upon me the silent treatment, yet I had no intention of pursuing him. I had tasks to accomplish, and I certainly wasn't going to allow this entire situation to disrupt my flow. Yet, as I pondered further, it became increasingly clear that his anger extended beyond mere frustration over the concert. It was an essence that ran far beneath the surface. For some time, I sensed an unsettling shift in our connection, yet I brushed it aside, thinking little of it. Perhaps it was simply a matter of reluctance on my part. Perhaps it was simply that I was preoccupied with my own existence to pay attention. He had been somewhat aloof, no doubt, yet I believed he would eventually move past it. It seemed that men had a tendency to behave in such a manner, didn't they? They would become introspective, seeking solitude, only to eventually return with renewed energy. That is the way it has always been. Yet, as the evening wore on and the children settled into their slumber, I found myself unable to dismiss it any longer. Ethan sat there, as if he had been anticipating my long-overdue confrontation. I found myself unprepared to offer an apology, yet I refused to allow him the power to wield this over me indefinitely. As I settled into my seat opposite him, I endeavored to maintain an air of composure, though the effort proved to be quite challenging. The atmosphere was thick with tension. So, Ethan, what's truly happening here? I inquired, folding my arms across my chest. I had no intention of pleading for his attention, yet here I was, weary of the unyielding silence. At first, he didn't even cast a glance in my direction. He continued to gaze at the TV, as if I were invisible, and that infuriated me more than anything else. What led him to believe that I was the source of the issue? As if I hadn't been the one confined at home with 2 children while he roamed free, indulging in his whims. I don't know, Claire, he said. At last, he directed his gaze toward me. Perhaps I've grown weary of being overlooked, weary of existing as your secondary consideration. I chuckled, though it was far from amusing. It was a laugh born of frustration, devoid of any trace of amusement. Overlooked? I can't believe this is happening. I toil relentlessly each day at my job, manage the household, and ensure the well-being of the children, yet you sit here as if my efforts are insufficient. At this juncture, I find myself perplexed about your expectations of me. I need you to genuinely engage with the events unfolding around us." He retorted, his voice escalating slightly. "I've been reflecting on the growing distance between us. I long for you to see me as your husband once more, rather than merely the man who handles the finances and manages the responsibilities while you enjoy your time away." His words struck with an unexpected force, yet I was determined not to reveal the impact they had on me. "Oh, so I'm the villain now?" I lost my composure. Was it because I attended a concert? Was it merely a single night of enjoyment in your absence? Come on, Ethan, it's time to move on. It was a singular night. I haven't been the one moping around for days on end. He raised his hands skyward, as if in disbelief at the words that reached his ears. "It's not merely about the concert, Claire. It encompasses all that lies beyond. Do you really believe I haven't seen the distance you've been creating between us? Do you really believe I'm oblivious to the extent of your careless spending? How many times must I express this before it truly resonates with you?" I blinked. What was he referring to? I carried a bit of credit card debt, of course, but really, who among us hasn't? I may not have been a financial prodigy, yet I certainly wasn't squandering our entire savings. It was merely the small pleasures, the items I indulged in for myself during moments of melancholy. Was that truly such a significant matter? "I'm not sure, perhaps you're just amplifying this situation more than necessary," I remarked, attempting to downplay it. "I have it all managed. I consistently find myself doing so." "Do you truly?" he inquired, his tone tinged with skepticism. "Each time I look, I find yet another charge on our account for something unnecessary. Yet another indulgence that lies beyond our means. It seems you often prioritize your own needs, but what about the children? What is to become of us?" His words struck me with a force greater than the guilt I had sought to evade. Yet, even at that moment, the understanding eluded me. The issue eluded my understanding entirely. I wasn't out there throwing my money around like a compulsive spender or anything. I was worthy of beautiful things. He failed to grasp it. "You know what, Ethan," I said, rising to my feet. "You truly fail to comprehend. I put in the effort, and I believe I merit a small indulgence for myself every now and then. If my spending habits don't sit well with you, perhaps a greater involvement in the financial matters would have been beneficial. However, please don't cast a shadow on my efforts to prioritize my well-being. You're the one who remains here, cloaked in misery, as if it's my duty to mend everything for you." His visage contorted with fury. "I'm not requesting that you resolve every issue. I'm merely requesting a touch of effort. A touch of focus. Perhaps that is asking for too much." The barrier separating us seemed to grow denser with each passing moment. It felt as though we were merely exchanging words, each of us reluctant to truly engage with the other. And then, just when I believed the situation had reached its nadir, I beheld it, the missive, the one I had cast aside on the table the previous night. It transcended the realm of a mere note. It was merely a compilation. A compilation of all the things he believed I had overlooked. The funds. The moment has arrived. The manner in which I pretended to be too occupied for him. As I gazed upon it, a realization began to dawn on me. The experience transcended the mere concert. It transcended mere expenditure. It encompassed all that one could desire. How I had been distancing him without even being aware of it. Yet, I certainly had no intention of confessing that to him. "Not at this moment. Are you truly going to instill a sense of guilt in me for this?" I inquired, striving to maintain a calm tone. "Are you truly going to suggest that I am the one in the wrong here?" He gazed at me, pain etched across his features, yet I remained indifferent. I found myself unable to confess it. Not at that moment. The debate persisted, yet it showed no signs of improvement. The chasm between us seemed to widen with each passing moment. I found myself questioning just how much longer I could endure this situation. Yet, I found myself unwilling to yield. Not at this moment. The subsequent days unfolded in a haze of unease. Ethan spoke little to me, and I reciprocated with equal restraint. We existed as two strangers under the same roof, yet our presence felt almost absent. I dedicated countless hours to my job, and upon returning home, I immersed myself in the children's activities or any distraction that would keep me from confronting him. The stillness hung heavily in the air, an unspoken tension enveloping us, yet neither of us found the words to shatter it. The letter lingered in my thoughts, an echo that refused to fade away. The words he penned within those pages lingered in my mind longer than I cared to acknowledge. He had articulated it all with such precision, highlighting every misstep I had taken. Yet, even at this moment, I could not bring myself to accept that the blame rested solely on my shoulders. Indeed, I experienced my share of regret, yet I refused to allow him to triumph in this instance. I had no intention of confessing that I had been distancing myself from him, for doing so would require me to acknowledge my role in all that had unraveled. I found myself unprepared for such a step. The concert lingered in my thoughts, refusing to fade away. In certain respects, he was indeed correct. Anticipation coursed through me as I looked forward to that evening, a rare opportunity to indulge in a night solely dedicated to my own enjoyment. I believed it was merely an evening of revelry. Yet, I found myself sensing that it had transcended mere circumstances. Perhaps the concert was merely a backdrop to something far more significant. Perhaps it stemmed from a deep desire to break free, to seek out something different, anything beyond the confines of the life I was living. Yet, the most daunting aspect was my utter lack of knowledge on how to remedy any of it. Uncertainty enveloped me. I found myself at a loss, unsure of where to begin or if I even desired to mend the situation. The children were well. They were indifferent to whether we clashed or not. All they desired was their evening meal and the comforting embrace of bedtime tales. However, Ethan? He stood apart. He desired something from me that I wasn't certain I was prepared to offer. As the weekend unfolded, Ethan finally reached out to me once more. Yet, on this occasion, the focus shifted away from us. The matter at hand revolved around finances. "I need you to take a look at this," he said, sliding a pile of bills across the kitchen table towards me. His eyes bore the weight of exhaustion, and a hint of resignation lingered in his voice. "We are descending into the depths, Claire. It's time to face it head on." Initially, I paid no attention to the bills. Instead, I fixed my gaze upon him. His frustration was palpable, the extent to which he was restraining himself. It felt as though he had been shouldering this burden in solitude for months, and I had remained oblivious. "I assured you I have it all managed," I replied, dismissing the issue with a wave of my hand. "I am doing all that I can." Yet, even as the words escaped my lips, a part of me recognized their falsehood. It was clear to me that it was a fabrication. I found myself unable to take control of the situation. I was struggling to stay afloat, yet acknowledging it seemed akin to surrender. I refused to concede, not in his presence, not after all we had endured. "Do you really believe I'm foolish?" he inquired, his voice trembling with exasperation. "Do you really believe I'm oblivious to the unfolding events? It seems you've been parting with funds as if they were in endless supply. We cannot continue down this path, Claire." I remained seated, my gaze fixed upon him, and in that moment, after what felt like an eternity, I truly felt it. The burden of the truth of my actions. Yet, I remained silent. I simply rose and exited the room. Confronting it felt impossible. Confronting him was beyond my capacity. Throughout the remainder of the day, silence enveloped us. The distance between us seemed to expand, as if we were inhabiting entirely different worlds. I found myself torn between feelings of anger directed at him for his boldness in calling me out, and a deep-seated embarrassment for allowing the situation to escalate to this point. In any case, I found myself unprepared to acknowledge my actions. Yet, as the night unfolded, a subtle change began to take hold. As I settled into the couch, my fingers danced across the screen of my phone, a quiet moment unfolding as the children finally drifted off to sleep. The house lay in silence, an unsettling stillness enveloping it. Ethan occupied the chair opposite me, his gaze fixed upon me, yet his expression remained a mystery. The silence had become unbearable. "Do you really believe I'm unaware of the depths of despair we face?" I spoke, my voice trembling ever so slightly. "I understand, yet I find myself uncertain about your expectations of me." "What would you like me to do?" He paused before responding. He merely gazed at me, his expression brimming with frustration and pain. "Please cease the pretense that all is well. I desire for you to genuinely concern yourself with our circumstances. At this moment, it seems as though you do not." It struck me. More challenging than any other words he had uttered. I had been putting on a facade, feigning that all was well, acting as if I remained oblivious to the fissures emerging. Yet, I had become so ensnared in my own private realm, consumed by my own self-serving desires, that I failed to recognize the extent of the deterioration around me. For perhaps the first time, a twinge of guilt washed over me. Yet, it wasn't sufficient to truly acknowledge my mistake. Not at this moment. I apologize, all right? I spoke, my voice scarcely rising above a whisper. Yet, I find myself at a loss for what steps to take next. I'm at a loss on how to resolve this issue. He merely nodded, an air of defeat surrounding him. I find myself equally uncertain, Claire. However, we cannot continue down this path. The gravity of his words pressed upon me, yet I remained unprepared to confront the reality before me. Not at this moment. Perhaps at another time, but not at this moment. I rose to my feet and turned my back on him. I found myself reluctant to confront it. I was reluctant to confront the repercussions of my choices. Not at this moment. Yet, buried within me, there was an undeniable certainty that I must take that step. I continued to feign, to sidestep the unavoidable truth. For that was my greatest strength. Yet, how much longer could I maintain this facade? That was the inquiry I wished to evade. The days that followed that charged conversation seemed to stretch endlessly. Yet, the harder I endeavored to cast aside the guilt, the more burdensome it grew. I found myself lost in thought, gazing at Ethan, pondering whether he could ever genuinely absolve me for all that I had done. Yet, I found myself unprepared to confront it completely. I found myself lost in the thought that if I simply continued on, if I maintained the facade that all was well, perhaps it will resolve on its own. Yet, beneath the surface, I understood it would not come to pass. It never happened. After that night, Ethan maintained a careful distance. He wasn't impolite, yet there lingered a chill in his gaze that I found impossible to overlook. It felt as though he had transformed into a different individual, one who had mastered the art of concealing his emotions in my presence. I attempted to maintain a facade of normalcy, engaging in trivial conversation, yet the silence that enveloped us weighed more heavily than it ever had in the past. Truthfully, I found myself at a loss for words. I had driven him to the edge, and uncertainty loomed over whether he could ever return from such depths. A few weeks later, I came to understand the extent of the distance that had developed between us. On a bustling Saturday, I found myself darting through the house, preparing the kids for a birthday celebration, when Ethan strolled into the kitchen. His expression remained a mystery, yet I sensed an unmistakable shift in the air. The atmosphere surrounding us seemed to hum with an unnameable energy, elusive yet palpable. I would like to discuss something with you. He spoke softly, his weary gaze fixed on me. I paused in my actions, offering him a tentative smile, striving to appear nonchalant. Hello there. He paused, a moment of uncertainty hanging in the air, before finally taking a seat at the kitchen table. I've been reflecting deeply on all that has transpired between us, on the nuances of our connection, and on you. The knot in my stomach tightened, a palpable tension coiling within me. He was on the verge of mentioning the concert once more, or the finances, or perhaps a combination of the two. Yet, deep down, I sensed that the direction of this conversation would not be to my liking. I understand that things haven't been ideal, I began, attempting to steer the conversation, but we'll find a way through this, as we always manage to do. He slowly shook his head. I'm uncertain if we will succeed this time. I stood still, caught in a moment of sheer disbelief. Could you clarify what you mean? He reflected on all that you had done, his voice a quiet yet unwavering murmur. The concert, your extravagant spending, your demeanor as if none of this holds any significance. It transcends the trivialities now, Claire, it revolves around how you have regarded me, how you have regarded us. A lump began to form in my throat, yet I remained silent. I found myself unprepared to acknowledge anything, not at this moment. I've attempted to forgive you, Ethan continued, his voice steady yet edged with emotion. Yet, I find myself doubting my ability to do so, not entirely. You have ventured into territory that is difficult to return from. It struck me with a force I hadn't anticipated. I had not fully grasped the extent to which I clung to the notion that everything might return to its former state. That, in some way, he would erase all that I had done. Yet Ethan had always been the type of individual who found it impossible to simply let go. Despite my best efforts to feign indifference, he was determined not to release me from this predicament. Apologies escaped my lips, yet even as they did, I sensed their emptiness echoing in the air. The words that reached his ears were not the ones he had longed for. He sought not the hollow echoes of my speech. I don't need your apology right now, he replied, his gaze unwavering and resolute. I require you to recognize the consequences of your actions, to truly understand the extent of the harm you've inflicted. You believe I'm unaware of your charade, that you're acting as if all is well, as if none of this holds significance, but it does, Claire. Indeed, it truly does. I gazed at him, the gravity of his words settling deep within me. This transcended mere concert attendance, financial considerations, or the physical space that separated us. It revolved around his waning sense of trust in me. No matter how deeply I yearned to mend the situation, the actions I had taken were irrevocable. I didn't mean to hurt you, I murmured, the weight of my own selfishness settling heavily upon me. Yet, I understood that it fell short. It would never be. I understand you didn't, Ethan said, his voice taking on a gentler tone, but that doesn't alter the reality of what happened, and I find it increasingly difficult to maintain the facade that everything is fine. Not any longer, and that was the undeniable truth. He would not let the memory of my actions slip away. He refused to release me from my obligations with mere hollow apologies and assurances of improvement. I had ventured beyond the boundaries. No matter how hard I attempted to rationalize my choices, the harm inflicted remained unaltered. That night, I reclined in bed beside him, my gaze fixed on the ceiling, allowing myself to fully embrace the heaviness of it all. The weight of regret, the sting of guilt, the dawning awareness that I had driven him beyond his limits. I had fallen short of being the partner he truly deserved, and despite my deep desire to mend what was broken, I understood that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges. I reflected on the origins of it all, how I had become ensnared by my own impulsive nature, my yearning for liberation, and how it had evolved into something far grander than I could have ever envisioned. I had underestimated his presence in my life, and now I was confronted with the repercussions. As dawn broke and the children embarked on their various pursuits, Ethan and I found ourselves seated together, ready to share a moment of quiet companionship. The atmosphere had settled into a hush, the tension lingering like a heavy fog, yet for the first time in weeks, our words flowed freely between us. I found myself unprepared to fully acknowledge all that I had done, yet deep down, I understood that I could no longer maintain the facade that everything was fine. Not any longer. I'm not sure we can mend this, I admitted, my voice quivering, but I will make the effort. I may not be flawless, Ethan, yet I yearn to set things straight. He gazed at me, and for an instant, I caught a glimpse of something flickering in his eyes. It wasn't quite forgiveness, not at this moment, but perhaps it marked the beginning of something new, perhaps it wasn't too late after all. I can't say for certain if we can, he murmured, but I'm ready to make the attempt, provided you are too. Perhaps that is the most challenging aspect of it all. Understanding that mere words of apology hold little weight, true remorse must be demonstrated through actions. That was a challenge I had my doubts about, yet I was determined to give it a shot. Even if it required a deep and honest examination of my own flaws and the daunting task of mending all that I had shattered.